Welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Susan Pettit-Crossman. Recently, there's been a lot of news coverage about the lack of employment possibilities for young people in this country. They've been called the lost generation by some. Later on today's program, we'll take an in-depth look at how young people with disabilities who are searching for a job have been affected by these tough economic times. First, here's this week's Disability News highlights. Some students with disabilities in Toronto are worried because their training program is in jeopardy. Special education students at the City Adult Learning Centre are fighting to save their program. Next year, staff allocated by Toronto Board of Education will drop from 5.5 teachers to 2.5. The board says it's not required to provide special education for adults, only for youths. Students believe they're being denied an equal opportunity to education. Deborah Taylor is one of those students.
Being a mother of two, has two children in the special ed department, I'm very, very grateful that there is a special ed department in the junior schools and in high schools. But I'm sorry, being over 21 doesn't mean that you don't deserve an education. We deserve a chance.
Representatives from the Toronto Board of Education say they don't want to see any special education programs die. The tough economy has meant cuts to all education programs in Toronto. The board suggests fighting for equal status to youth programs is one solution for the City Adult Learning Centre. The students just want their program to stay intact.
We're hoping that we can sway them to our side. I've spoke to the advocacy office and that they'll be my next step. Hopefully something can get done.
The school will fill the gap next year with teachers from other streams, but they don't know what will happen in 1995. The closure of a hospital in Sydney, Nova Scotia means the end of a business for one entrepreneur. Carol Ann Drake has the details.
Please, thank you.
Raymond Young has never let his disability get in the way of being independent. He was born with a visual impairment. Even though he's legally blind and has been since birth, he has been involved in running canteens at Sydney's two major hospitals for over 20 years. Now his job is in jeopardy.
Thank you. This hospital will soon be closing within a year or so due to the new modern hospital that we are getting in this area. And I have no idea what is going to happen to me after that time. I am kind of concerned about it this time and hoping that things might work out. For me, it has meant a chance to be able to do the things that other people do, own a home, and be able to take trips and to contribute to the economy by paying my fair share to keep the economy going and not creating to the deficit by getting a handout from government to live, to exist. And this is an important part of my life. I've beaten the odds before when people have said, like the school has told my mother, well, all he'll do is sit home and watch soap operas the rest of his life. I haven't watched a soap opera in years. And that I can at least work. And I'm just hoping that the odds again, I hope I'll be able to beat the odds one more time again so I can continue to work until I'm at the right age to retire.
At the hospital, they say no decision has been made about the canteen. They don't know how the canteen will be run or if Raymond Young will be a part of it. Raymond says there is talk of volunteers running the canteen, and he says if that is the case, his chances of remaining an independent businessman don't look so good.
When Canadian athletes win gold medals, they're usually showered with praise and then money. But for one Calgarian who recently won gold in Norway, this is not the case. Doug Dirks has the story from Lake Louise.
Stacy Kohut is one of the world's fastest men on one ski. He's also on welfare.
I don't see any of the able-bodied athletes really having to worry about where their next bowl of soup's going to come from.
Kohut won Canada's only gold medal at the Paralympics in Norway, but he doesn't get any money from Sport Canada. In fact, it cost Kohut $1,000 just to get to Lillehammer, and his parents paid $2,500 for his sit ski. A number of summer disabled athletes are getting training dollars from the government. Kohut's gold medal also entitles him to receive some money, but because Sport Canada only makes decisions on athletic assistance once a year, he may not see any of it until the end of 1994. And even then, he'll get far less than an able-bodied gold medalist because Ottawa considers disabled skiing a non-Olympic event.
Right now, I'm looking for equality. I think equality is the big deal. If I can get on an equal basis in the government's eyes and in Sport Canada's eyes as an athlete, I think that might transfer over to equality in general life.
Kohut was paralyzed 2 years ago when he fell off a swing. He says skiing gave him hope, and he'd like to be a role model for other disabled people.
So spending a little bit of money on now getting me carded might seem a little bit on the harsh side for the government, but in 30 years when you're dealing with all the disabled people who are overweight and having heart attacks and stuff, they're going to be spending a lot more money then than they would be to support me now.
Kohut had a chance to air his views in Ottawa this week when he met the Prime Minister at a reception for Olympic athletes. He wished he could have been packing his sit ski for the U.S. Nationals in Colorado, but that costs money. Money Kohut just doesn't have. That's this week's roundup of disability news highlights. When we come back, young people with disabilities and the search for jobs.
It's sort of disheartening when you go to school and you get your grade 12 and you do all the things and you're intelligent, but then you go to look for a job and you're immediately turned away because you don't walk the same as somebody else. I mean, it's not a justifiable reason for being unemployed, in my opinion.
Whenever there's a recession, the lack of jobs becomes a crucial issue. The competition for those few jobs intensifies as the school year ends, and students who are entering the workforce find themselves at the bottom of the heap. But for a young person with a disability, the situation is just that much worse. John Burley has been looking for employment for a while now. He hasn't had much luck, but he keeps looking.
I'm just getting a little disheartened by always looking and searching and looking and searching and looking and finding nothing at the end of the road. I mean, I almost give up on fighting. Fighting for what? I mean, there's nothing there. And people are telling me, don't give up, go, 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 but I've been doing that. I've been out of school for a year solid, and that's been my life from 9 o'clock in the morning till whenever my legs get tired and I gotta head back home. I'd like to be an advocate because I feel through myself now, being out in the world on my own, living on my own, that there's a great need for that for handicapped people. And that's what I'd like to do, but unfortunately, there's no jobs in that field either. I thought about going to college for that, and before I did, I figured I'll look into what the job situation is like first, and there's nothing around for advocates. The advocacy course is only a 6-month course. It's not like it's going to leave a lot of time for economical growth. I mean, I'll likely come out and be in the same position, but short a few $1,000s less from my college fees.
Student Assistance Branch, Kalinda Joseph speaking.
Kalinda Joseph works in a government office building in Hull, Quebec. She feels that her education was a key factor in securing the position.
I think I was able to find work fairly easily, not fairly easily, but more quickly than someone else would, only because of my education. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, and I also have a diploma in Public Relations. And that was 7 years of post-secondary training. I also have a lot of volunteer experience working with organizations for people with disabilities. And those volunteer jobs also led to summer employment for me while I was going to school. Education really is the key to finding any employment in Canada. Even people without disabilities are finding that. So, and it's doubly important for a person with a disability only because they have so many other barriers to overcome. I think that youth with disabilities have to be taught that it's okay to go to a post-secondary institution, that high school is not the last step in their education process. Funding is a big thing for students or for youth who want to go to post-secondary institutions. I know that a lot of it's being cut back, and people are finding themselves in really awkward situations where they can't afford to go to post-secondary institutions.
It's been 2 years since I've been in school, and just when I left, the costs were getting so high that I thought I probably wouldn't be able to afford it if I was going to school now. I've got a $10,000 debt to pay off. I don't know when that's going to happen.
Eric Fabris is in debt due to the cost of his education. A summer job can help pay for some of those costs, but with the lack of them, students now also find themselves in a catch-22 situation.
There are none. Basically. I mean, it's not a matter of not having the right education. Obviously, it's just there is none.
What do you think?
I guess, yeah, the exact same thing. There aren't any jobs available. For instance, we're in nursing, and if you don't have experience, a lot of jobs require some experience in order to be hired. If you don't have the experience to start with, how are you going to get the job?
Many young people with a disability who are looking for work have a serious problem, and that problem is employer discrimination.
It's a matter of ignorance, in my opinion. I mean, I think it's more, people need to be more aware that we're not mutants, we're just incapable of some things, but we're very capable of other things. The community has to start looking at our strengths rather than our weaknesses.
And that's really important to tell people, look, I'm not going to take you to court if you hire me. If I have a disability, I have a disability, but I also have this list of qualifications that are really important to look at. So take these qualifications, compare them to other people who may not have a disability or even who do have a disability, and hire the best person. Now, if you have a position that's been deemed for a person with a disability, then hire the best person for that position no matter what their disability is, even if it's a hidden disability.
I have a hidden disability which would hamper my looking for jobs, my finding work. Definitely potential employers out there would find it very difficult to hire me on the spot or after some due consideration because of this disability. It's one of an interesting set of disabilities. It's a psychiatric disability, which would entail an employer getting very flighty and frighty. If they knew that I had this label, then they might think twice about hiring me.
Employers might think that accommodating a person with a disability might cost tens of thousands of dollars, where it might just be an accessible office and an accessible washroom on the floor.
These things are to the employer, they're potentially very hazardous, and I depending on what the disability is and so forth, I think that, again, it's the stigma. It's that people don't recognize that though the needs may be different, the skills are just the same, and the intelligence is the same, and the capacities are the same. They're not issues of can you do the job or not. The issues are how would you like to do the job.
If, after all the roadblocks, a young person with a disability does land a job, the battle has just begun, because the job security just isn't there.
I'm being funded through the Employment Equity Program of the Public Service Commission, and my contract is for 6 months, with the possibility of extension, but who knows what's going to happen at the end of 6 months. And through all the jobs that I've had, I've never had a job that was permanent, full-time job.
I'm presently employed now. It's a part-time job. It's not sure. It's not insurable. And if I lose this job, then it's back pounding the pavement.
Ken Lipton is an employment counselor with the Canadian Paraplegic Association.
What you have, for example, is a number of people, a number of the group that I'm working with that have had 3 or 4 jobs in a year or 2 years because they've worked at 3 or 4 different contracts. But unfortunately, they're still back to square one again because they haven't been able to find work with a company that would offer them, be able to get permanent employment. What happens is you can hire people for contract work and it looks good in the statistics, but who's fooling who? At the end of the 5 or 6 months, people are back to square one again. So I think it's incumbent on them to, start the ball rolling and if they can, try to hire people on a permanent basis. And it's especially, just as an aside, a lot of people, for example, with a spinal cord injury or spinal cord related disability, there's things like benefits, and often these are just what they need, drug plans, things like that they need just to exist on a day-to-day basis. So it's even more important for them to be hired on a permanent basis.
Figures released recently by StatsCan show the national unemployment rate at 10.6%, the lowest rate in several years. However, StatsCan goes on to say that those figures are due in part to the fact that 28,000 young people have given up the search.
If the government just lays back and takes their time, people like myself that could be a valid contribution to society are just going to lose whatever ambitions they had to function in life, and they're just going to give up on themselves, and it'll be too late.
But for many young people with a disability, a job is a necessity, and the search for that job takes them to many different employment agencies. Several of those agencies are associated with organizations that focus in on specific disabilities, but there are alternatives.
To get a job, I usually go through as many of the regular channels as I can that a person who doesn't have a disability uses, only because some of the employment, while some of the employment agencies for people with disabilities are quite good and provide an excellent service, I often find that they don't have positions for me that I feel are suitable for me and that are what I'm interested in doing. So I would try and use the newspaper or other advertisements for employment that are out there.
I think in empowering young people with disabilities, part of it is job search skill programs, which help youth with disabilities to market their abilities to employers. And we need training programs that provide them with skills that are or will soon be in demand to enable them to better market themselves to employers and start their own businesses. Programs which are physically and financially accessible are absolutely integral to empowering these people. And we have to create some stability by moving from training to employment. It's okay to train people, but they also have to work. And in doing that, I think while we're training people, we want to go have them go from training to employment. We have to look at the involvement of provinces and other partners, different levels of governments, municipalities as well. They have the right to dream, the right to believe in themselves, and they have access. They have the right to have access to all of those programs and services that are out there. Get an education, market yourself. Don't be afraid to go it alone and to try something different like entrepreneurship. Get out there and use all of the programs and services and insist that you be served.
I do have an idea, and I would like to employ myself. I've come to the conclusion now that a lot of handicapped and disabled people have to just make it for themselves, because it's like anything. I mean, nobody's going to knock on your door and offer you a job. You got to do what you can and make the best of it.
Not everyone's a budding entrepreneur or can work for themselves. Many people believe that young people with disabilities do not have the support of effective legislation.
Human rights legislation in this country says that people with disabilities should not be discriminated against on the basis of their disability. But there's no legislation in this country that compels employers to hire people with disabilities, gives them a duty to accommodate people with disabilities. The Employment Equity Act clearly doesn't have any teeth. And we've got a situation right now that employers who are under the Employment Equity Act, which really covers about 350 major employers across Canada, including the federal government and major banks and CBC, other institutions, have a record of hiring people with disabilities around 2.5% of their total labor force. And those statistics are less than half of the rate of employment of people with disabilities in the private sector.
Just like in the recession of 82, 83, it was basically the private sector that came out of the doldrums and there were more jobs out there. That's what I think sort of drove a lot of the recovery in the mid-80s, right up until 1990, the last part of 1990, and I think that's what's going to happen again. In the past, I think one of the difficulties is I think we put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, relying on the government, and in fairness to them, I think they are trying to do what they can, but I think they are hamstrung, and I think it's important, it's incumbent on people, young people with disabilities, to just not look at the government, but to look at all the different areas, the private sector, the schools, to help make things easier for them to integrate eventually, get their education, get into the workforce.
Well, the responsibility doesn't belong to one person or one country. It's a global problem, it's an international problem, it's a national problem, it's a regional problem. It's a problem for different levels of government. It's a problem for unions, NDO, and the private sector. So it requires a solution that sort of spells out partnerships. I think there's no go-it-alone solutions for dealing with the opportunities for disabled people.
But can it really be all doom and gloom? Young people need to have confidence in their future. They need to know their government is working on their behalf.
There's a possibility of being optimistic because I was at a policy forum in March on government systems and how they're revamping it, and it sounds like there's some pretty good ideas.
Currently, the federal government is undergoing a review of social programs in this country, which will be completed, I believe, by September. Within the context of that review, the federal Minister of Human Resources Development, Lloyd Axworthy, is looking at employment and training programs. He is also looking at student financial aid programs, things like UIC, Canada Pension Plan. All these kinds of programs can be improved within the context of a national program on training and employment for people with disabilities.
We believe that we don't only need a strategy, we need an attitude as the government in relationship to the integration of persons with disabilities, and it has to become basically a cornerstone of every program, every service, every department, and every Crown corporations and central agency of the government to ensure that accessibility is there for persons with disabilities, and also that we integrate in the smoothest and easiest of ways for those persons.
It's just going to take a bit of time to get the wheels rolling, and they don't really know where they're going, and once the programs are initiated, a person like myself might see a nice big opportunity to take a hold of something and try and make a go of it.
There may be more good news for young people with disabilities who are looking for work. Lately, the placement of employment want ads has increased by 2%. There has also been an increase of $20 million in federal funding directed towards the Summer Employment Experience Development Program, known as SEED. And the federal government is launching 30 pilot programs to get unemployed young people working. These new projects were designed to include young people with disabilities. If you are looking for employment information for people with disabilities, this publication may be a help. Titled At Your Fingertips, it has been compiled by the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work. It profiles more than 300 organizations across Canada, and it's updated annually. That's our show. We'd like to hear your job search stories or tips. Drop us a line. I'm Susan Pettit-Crossman. Now, here's our address. Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. You can fax us at 416-205-3399. This program is brought to you in part by the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto and the Canadian Association of Independent Living Centres.